About gay marriage. Pastor Stacy Swimp is founder of the Michigan-based Revive Alive Missional Ministry. He is also spokesperson for about 200 African-American ministers who are now fighting to protect traditional marriage in the federal courts. He is also spokesperson for the nation's largest network of black conservatives and the National Center for Public Policy. Pastor, good to see you. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Paul's got the first question.
Good morning, Reverend.
Good morning.
Just to start with the news of the day, I guess your coalition put out a news release this morning saying that Michigan Republicans who put in a brief with the court supporting same-sex marriage are racist. How do you make that connection?
When the Jennifer Grass and the others who filed against the so-called racial preferences of University of Michigan, their whole premise was to eliminate race preferences with the emphasis, if you go back and you look at an emphasis on black Americans, but yet turn right around and try to replace that with sexual preferences with a agenda and a conduct or social behavior that has a disparative impact in terms of health endemics on the black community. So we're looking at outcomes. This behavior, this conduct is devastating to the black community. 44% of all HIV cases, for example, are black Americans. Ages of 15 to 25 HIV cases, black Americans directly related to this homosexual conduct behavior. So the idea that these Republicans would emphasize reduction of so-called civil rights or affirmative action with the emphasis of focusing on black Americans and yet turn around and push an agenda that devastates the black community, we find to be very nefarious.
So you're arguing that they argue to take away preferences from blacks when it comes to university entry, but not favor preferences for gays.
We definitely argue.
That's the hypocrisy you're talking about, right?
Tremendous hypocrisy. And we always say this, and I say this in particular to Jennifer Grass or anyone that says that they care so much about racial preferences. If the question of race doesn't matter to you, then why didn't you argue to take the question of race off of the applications of the University of Michigan? If the question of race, if it was really just about that, you want to get rid of all preferences, why didn't you also argue to get rid of legacy preferences, meaning that just because your mom and dad donates money to any particular university shouldn't entitle you to any points or any leverage or preferences to a university? But that wasn't part of the discussion.
When you say this conduct is devastating to the black community, are you referring to marriage?
Very, very funny. No, I'm not referring to marriage. I'm talking about homosexuality. Homosexuality. That was a discussion, and what we're saying that homosexuality as a behavior, okay, and it is a behavior, as a behavior has been destructive to the black community in particular. Now that's a subject no one wants to talk about. They want to use ad hominems and all types of distractions, but the reality is 44% of all HIV/AIDS cases of black Americans, and if you go back and these are not numbers by some conservative or Democrat, or it's not a political thing, okay? If you look at the CDC, Center for Disease Control, they put out statistics that said that 7% of the American population are responsible for 70% of the HIV cases. I mean, that's alarming. We need to have that discussion.
Pastor, there were other names on that amicus brief. Former Senator Joe Schwartz, former Speaker of the House, Mr. Johnson. Some would say the racist card here is maybe a little over the top.
Well, they can say it if they want to. I don't have a problem with them saying that. We think it's a legitimate discussion. And listen, since I've been standing up for religious freedom and since I've been standing up for traditional marriage, I've personally been attacked relentlessly by people from the homosexual demographic. Project 21, for example, put out. I sent them. I forwarded to them a voicemail that I got with homosexuals leaving all these dirty messages on my voicemail, calling me that infamous N-word. So in California, when the Marriage Protection Amendment was passed, in California, it's a matter of record that black Americans in particular started facing devastating, horrible attacks from the homosexual demographic. So I think it's a legitimate discussion.
Reverend, a lot of the same-sex marriage debate revolves around gay and lesbian couples who are just trying to seek the same rights, whether it's through adoptions or property rights, as heterosexual couples. Do you see a middle ground somewhere where?
No, I don't see any middle ground. At the end of the day, I was talking to a gentleman just this morning, and what I said was that if something is really good for you, then the best way to measure that is our outcomes, right? So if a social behavior results in health endemics, the homosexual demographic, the lifespan of homosexual males is up to 20 years young. They die 20 years less, if you will, than heterosexual males. This is a very dangerous behavior. Traditional marriage is God's design. God is not wrong. At the end of the day, we've had 2,000, 3,000 years of human civilization, depending on whose timeline you want to believe. But forever, we've had traditional marriage. Homosexuals cannot procreate. The whole purpose of marriage also is to procreate. You cannot procreate. Two males together cannot do that. Two females so the whole point of family is to preserve our human civilization and to unite boys and girls around the one institution that can unite a child, a young child, male and female, to their mother and their father is marriage.
The role of government to enforce that moral belief?
I think that God instituted government to protect religious freedom. Absolutely. Remember, if you go back to the Old Testament, for those of us that believe in the Bible, it was God's idea to create government, and the whole point of government is to protect our God-given rights and our God-given design of family. Now, government didn't create that idea. God did. Government does have a responsibility to uphold and protect religious freedom and to sustain the protections around family for which it was created.
Couldn't we have two systems of marriage? Couldn't we have the religious, church-based system of marrying people in their faith, and then have a marriage licensing type system under the government?
No, again, there is no such thing as marriage aside from one man and one woman. When you start creating alternative to God's design and nature itself, you're going to create a very dangerous precedent. You create confusion. How many studies have we had? And we've had many. When you create an environment where you're raising boys and girls in a same-sex situation, it can be very confusing for a young person because kids, all of us, we tend to emulate what we see.
Pastor, that was one of the issues in the court case, and the judge ruled that wasn't the case at all.
Well, the same judge ruled that it's illogical to vote based upon your moral conscience. So that judge ruling that, to me, doesn't mean the judge is right. It means that we have a lot of activist judges across the country who've decided that the rule of law doesn't matter, the Constitution doesn't matter, and they will come up with any, I'm going to be very blunt, wacky, off-the-wall ruling to make the decision, do what they want to do. The people of Michigan, 2.7 million voters, went to the polls and decided. It's interesting that the same people who fought against affirmative action in the University of Michigan, they fought this case all the way up to the SCOTUS. Remember, the SCOTUS upheld the voter approved a ban on affirmative action. So why would the same group of people expect that the court should not uphold the will of the people who went to the polls? 2.7 Black Americans voted almost 70% in favor of marriage protection in this state. Same in California, same in North Carolina.
So it really comes down to an argument of singling out specific populations for preferential treatment. Isn't that at the heart of your opposition, besides the moral, religious argument to it?
The heart of our argument is to uphold traditional marriage, but then we're also very concerned about the discrimination. Understand something. Take, for example, the Elliott Larson's Act, if I may bring that up here in the state of Michigan. If they amend this act to create sexual preferences, we know for a fact, because we've seen it across the country, that's going to open the gate for particularly Christian business owners, to face discrimination in this. And so this is not a sexual preference for homosexuals. This is discrimination against Christians. Look at Colorado, when you had bakers who were forced, where they're trying to force them to bake a cake with an image of two women on a cake, which would violate their religious conscience. But then not only are they being told they have to do it, they're being told they have to go to sensitivity training to desensitize them to their own religious conscience.
Pastor,
that's what we're opening up. That's what we're opening ourselves up to here in the state of Michigan.
If the opponents were here today, they might ask you, did God make a mistake by creating homosexuals?
God doesn't make mistakes, and God didn't. We're not born. What you're asking me, are homosexuals born gay? That's the argument they would make. And I would say that all of us, according to the Bible, are shaped in sin, shaped in iniquity. That means that every one of us, everyone sitting at this table, has a predisposition to something. Our natural instinct to grow up when we were growing up was to do wrong, but we had to be taught to do right. So I don't have any doubt in my mind that from an emotional, psychological standpoint, that homosexuals have an orientation, a desire, or attraction to the opposite sex. but we also know that we have a God who says that with the temptation, he gives us a way out. Do you know that we have hundreds of thousands of homosexuals and lesbians today who are no longer that? They're now born-again Christian evangelicals. I have a good friend of mine. Her name is Janet Boynes. She was married to another woman in California, but today she's an evangelist for the Assemblies of God Church. Guess what? I have met people who are formerly homosexual, but I have never met anyone who is formerly black.
Reverend, what's your reaction when you hear people compare the move for same-sex marriage to the civil rights movement?
It's insulting. Dr. King's daughter said it well. She said, my daddy didn't die. He didn't take a bullet for homosexuality. Being black is immutable. You see, when I walk into a room, you probably noticed I was black. You guys probably noticed, right? But you might have missed it. But when you walk into a room, you can see I'm black. Many times you can walk into a room, a business or a situation, and face discrimination. We don't live in a post-racial society. It does happen sometimes. No one can say that their sexual orientation is immutable, in the sense it's not who they are, it's how they choose to respond to it. My orientation is I love women, right? I'm attracted to women.
Quickly, Pastor.
And so at the end of the day, I can choose whether I want to act on it or not. They can make the same decision. Being homosexual is not immutable. Being black is absolutely immutable.
Thank you, sir, for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Also, our thanks to Chris and Paul and Chad. I'm Tim Skubick for Off the Record.